Hello, everybody. Welcome.
Hello.
Just while some of you come in, we'll do a bit of chat. So welcome to the Noon Book Club. Lovely to see so many of you. We're really excited today to have a really juicy discussion, I think. Lots of our ladies will have read this in the blood. I think if Jen shows hers, she's actually got it the right way around because she's a clever tech person, she manages to do it so it doesn't look like you're showing it in the mirror, which is afraid slightly beyond me.
Right.
So hi, welcome to the Noon Book Club. I'm Eleanor Mills, for those of you who haven't come before. We're talking about this book, In the Blood, which is an incredible joint memoir by mother and daughter combo Arabella and Julia. We're going to be talking about kind of alcoholism and how that affects women in particular. And I think also there's probably a lot of interest, particularly from this group, on that whole kind of the tricky effect that can have on mother-daughter relationships. I think there's lots of us have got got slightly tricky relationships with our mothers. I think it would be fair to say. So I think exploring some of that is quite rich. And it's also really exciting for us to have to do this in a new format, because usually it's just me chatting to kind of one person. So it's great to have two joint writers and to have a queenager in training, or queenager in progress in Arabella kind of join us this evening. So welcome, Arabella and Julia. It's really lovely to have you.
Thank you.
And just so Noon is a community of women in midlife. We call them queenagers. As you know, I just wrote this book, Much More to Come, which is also published by HQ. So we will have the same publisher. And I think what's interesting about our community and quite unique is that we are very positive about this stage in life and what it heralds and moving into a new phase at kind of 45 plus. And our mission really here at Noon is to try and change the narrative that's told in the kind of broader culture about the women kind of at this point and beyond, because certainly as the editorial director of the Sunday Times and the editor of the magazine, I just really could see that there was a huge gendered ageism within the media. And so what Noon has been set up to do is to try and challenge that and to change that story. So I think this is a really kind of important part of that. So without more ado, who wants to kick off? Are we gonna let the queenager kind of kick off, or are we gonna
I think we should let Mum get going, and then I'll
Okay, I don't know what am I a queenager or am I an I don't know.
I think you're definitely a queenager. Queenager is anyone like 45, 50 plus. We don't have an upper age limit because
because
our ladies.
It was Graydon Carter who calls it upper middle age. I think that's where I am now.
Upper middle age is good. We talk about super queenagers.
Super queenagers.
No, I think you definitely can. So do you want to tell us a little bit about you, Julia, and also because you've written some very distinguished novels and you've kind of been known as a writer for a while, and
yes.
So just give us a little bio, and we'll do the same with Arabella, and then we'll get into the meat of
okay. I published my first novel when I was 28, which I look back on now and I think, my God, how the hell did I do that? I didn't go to university. I was one of those. I mean, this sounds so. It's not meant to sound snobbish, but I was kind of the last of the uneducated daughters of the upper classes, really. It wasn't considered, because I was a girl, it wasn't considered, my education wasn't really considered all that important. And so I'm really totally, I sort of, my first novel was about the First World War, actually. It was based on a relation of my great-grandfather's who died, who kept some very interesting war diaries published after his death. Anyway, I decided to write a novel about him because I read the draft diaries and they were so interesting and so full of emotion. He was a Catholic convert, all sorts of things. Anyway, the published version, all that had been edited out, and I thought, right, that's my subject. If only I'd known what I was getting myself into, because the First World War is an enormous subject. Anyway, I waded through that, and by the time I finished, I actually felt as if I'd fought in that war myself, you know. Anyway, and then I went on to publish another 5 novels after that, ending when I was about 42, and I'm now 68. So why has there been such a gap? Because I'm an alcoholic, and alcohol took me down when I was in my early 40s. I'd been drinking alcoholically since I was a teenager, and I'm very robust. I must be very robust physically. So I'd sort of survived somehow, but by the time I was in my early 40s, my emotional life was in ruins and my career had collapsed, basically. So it took me, I got sober when I was 53, and it was, you know, it was so interesting listening to your podcast earlier about, you know, women in their 50s, because I got sober at 53 and I literally had to start my life again. I literally had to begin again. And
Yes.
so that's where I got to. And then I've tried to write various novels. I haven't actually succeeded in writing a novel. I don't know whether I've lost my touch, but anyway, then I wrote this book with Arabella, and that takes us up to now. So I've had a huge gap, but it's quite exciting being 68 and being back in the you know,
Back in the game.
amazing. It's so exciting.
Well, and also that's a very excellent queenager narrative, because we're all
Yeah.
about new starts kind of at 50. So I got
Well,
put out of the Sunday Times pretty unceremoniously when I was just before I turned 50.
I gather, yes.
And have recreated and reinvented, and so have so many women within our community. And really
Yes.
what we try and say to everybody is, for whatever, you know, your reinvention came about because of getting sober at 53, we see that over half of women by the time they hit 50 have been through at least 5 of divorce, bereavement, redundancy, those kind of health issues, looking after elderly parents, caring for Gen Zs with big mental health problems. That's increasingly a big problem.
Yeah.
There's some kind of mental, physical, or domestic abuse, financial disaster, you know, addiction, all those things. And that often they all hit together in what we call a midlife collision, or if we're being a bit ruder, a midlife clusterfuck, at about at about 50. But there really isn't very much discussion about that in the culture. You know, we hear a bit about midlife crisis, but it's always couched in terms of men, you know, the running the secretary and buying the red Ferrari. And
Yeah.
the sense of this massive change that comes, I think, for all of us at this point, is not really discussed in the culture. So that's one of the things that we're really trying to kind of get on the radar at Noon. And I love your story of a reinvention of 53, a kind of new life when you got sober. I mean, we should definitely get you to write that for the Noon website, or kind of, you know, and
Thank you.
talk
I love
about that school,
to.
because I think that's a really, really, you know, really good story. So Arabella, tell us a little bit about you. You'd had a very distinguished academic career, I gather from the book, and you have also written some journalism yourself. And how old are you now?
So I'm 41 now.
Okay. Oh, you're nearly a queenager then.
I'm nearly a teenager, but I have small children, so I
Yeah.
guess I don't feel I feel like I'm well, I feel a bit too I have a 1-year-old, and I feel a bit too old
Oh.
1-year-old, to be perfectly frank. But I am, so I guess I'm predominantly a journalist. I wanted to be an academic and I didn't succeed at that, as I write in the book. I did my PhD in the States, and I kind of fell into journalism. Sort of, you know, I always felt, you know, my mother was a writer, so I felt that, you know, eventually I would write as well. And it took me quite a long time to sort of find my genre and to find my style. And then, so I'm a journalist, I guess predominantly for the Spectator, the Times, the Telegraph, the Mail, but also importantly to me, I'm an ambassador for the National Association for Children of Alcoholics. And so
Yeah.
everything that I do and everything that I try to write is kind of geared around, you know, this idea that children grow up, you know, in the shadows of addiction, and it's a kind of forgotten problem by the government. And I just feel very strongly about how that shapes who you become, and how, you know, and you know, if I can do any writing that gives that, you know, that idea a platform, then, you know, it's worth it, I guess. And, you know, so Mum and I suppose we'll come to how we got to write the book, but I'm a journalist, and I guess Mum's a novelist and I'm a non-fiction writer.
Mm.
I think
Mm.
I wanted, you know, I desperately wanted to be an academic and spend my life in a library. And I realized, we talk about reinvention. I mean, I realized I just wasn't very good at it. Or I didn't have what it takes to be, you know, to be an academic. And then I got into journalism and I started quite a lot of first person writing, and that is sort of how I've wound up here. Yeah.
So for those, so how old were you, Arabella, when you got sober?
Right. So I was 26 when I got
Wow.
sober. So, you know, I've had nearly 15 years of continuous sobriety. And I guess it's difficult to say I reinvented myself at 26. I say that I sort of my emotional life began when I was 26. You know, I always say that I grew up in the rooms of AA, and
Mm,
that to me is feels, you know, it feels right. Those are the rooms in which I learnt a lot of things I think that I would have learnt, you know, as if I had been able and I hadn't been, you know, struggling with addiction. I think I would have learnt, you know, as a teenager and as I sort of, you know, in adolescence and in my early 20s, and that didn't happen for me. And my sort of the great good fortune of my life is that I've been able to grow up around a fellowship of people, you know, and you know, I've been sober longer than I drank now, so it's,
yeah. So
you
that's but it's still but it's still kind of quite defining for you, it sounds, if you're still, you know, you're doing the children of alcoholics.
yeah, it is. I would say it's probably it's how I self-identify most, really, and it continues to be the most important thing in my life, and I wouldn't really have the life that I have today. You know, I'm married and I have children, and when I was drinking, that just, you know, that seemed so out of my grasp. So, you know, to have this life today is really because of, you know, AA and because of the 12 steps. And I just I feel strongly that as a young woman, you might not sort of see yourself as an alcoholic. You might believe that you have other problems, but I know for me that I got the help I needed when I was young. And, you know, I'm very lucky.
So what brought you both to the well? Let's kind of let's rewind and start with this incredible moment where
Mm.
Julia has just started going to AA, yeah, and
Yeah.
Arabella
Mhm.
suddenly realizes that you realize on the kind of, you know, almost around the same time as your mum starts going to AA that you have a problem too. And you write very movingly in the book about picking up a kind of pamphlet or a piece of paper that was kind of lying around the house and going, you know, that's me. So I'm quite interested. What we're interested in here at Noon, and what I write about in my book, is the kind of granularity of change. Because
Mhm.
I was always you know, as a journalist, I always hated those articles which were like, oh, I was a, you know, banker in the city and now I'm a crofter in Scotland. And it's like, well, how on earth did you get from one to the other? That's like the worst piece of journalism ever, you know. So I'm really interested in, and what we try and do at Noon is create those kind of the kind of white pebbles which guided Hansel and Gretel out of the dark wood. We're trying to um,
Yeah.
leave kind of tracks or create new maps and signposts
Mm,
about
that's
what
very
this
true.
stage of life can be, and also how others can follow those steps. So why don't we kick off with really talking about the moment for both of you where you realized that the kind of the alcohol had to stop and what that felt like in that kind of beginning bit of the change.
You you
Shall I
go.
go first?
Yeah.
For some time I knew one or two people who didn't drink. I'd acquired a friend or two, one of whom is on this podcast, I noticed, who didn't drink, and I couldn't think how she could do it. So I was curious, and then I read an article in the Sunday Times actually, which I've interestingly never been able to track down since. It was an interview with David Niven's second wife, Hjordis. She was a Swedish model, and she was
Mm,
an alcoholic. And the journalist had interviewed her in a moment of she was sober, and she said, in the article, she said, he controls me, meaning David Niven, and alcohol controls me. And I thought, oh my God.
wow.
I thought, Oh my God. And I think it was, and it might sound a bit odd, but I think it was the first time I realized that alcohol was something separate from me. I'd started drinking so young. It had grown. I think I had the idea in my head that it was a kind of a part of me and I couldn't separate myself from it. And reading that remark, alcohol, he controls me, alcohol controls me. I thought, my God, it controls me too. And I suddenly was able to see it as something
Mm.
separate from myself. And that was the moment that I started to cave in. I began to realize, I don't know, it was all, I was in such a state, to be honest, that I look back
And also,
now.
but you write about in the book how, particularly in the kind of rather bohemian circles that you were mixing in, alcohol was very much a part of that life. You know, these long weekends
Everywhere was
out to
I mean, I had
France
a
or
boyfriend for a long time who's a painter, artist. And I mean, we spent our life in the Chelsea Arts Club drinking unbelievable amounts at lunchtime. And I remember going there for the first time. I must have been very young. And there was an old woman, she must have been about 50 now, I think, and who got so drunk she fell off her chair and had to be carried out by some of the people at the long table. And I thought, wow, no, oh God, look at this. This is my bohemian life. Little did I know that I was going to be that woman, carried out of the Chelsea Arts Club dining room, out of my off my head,
But I
But
think that there was very much a kind of an attitude, and I mean, I have to say, I see this when I go and see some friends of my parents, or even if I go and see my my mum and her bloke, that they start on the kind of the large gins at about 12 o'clock. At 6 o'clock, somebody hands you a kind of tumbler of vodka, which they call a martini. And then they have a couple of those, and then they start hitting the wine really hard, and then there's kind of a whiskey after supper. I mean, I don't drink, so for me, it's a complete anathema. I'm like, there's no way that I can drink all of that.
yeah,
And that's seen as a kind of very normal kind of
yeah,
consumption. I remember my grandmother, religiously would have a G&T at kind of 12:30 before lunch, kind of again, got that kind of quite posh, kind of very, as you describe in your book, those kind of very elegant tumblers with the kind of
yeah,
glass in it. And there was a whole ritual around the kind of lemon and the G&T and all that kind of thing. So it's
Mm.
very much part of a world and a class, isn't it?
yes. I think so. Drink was just there, and I thought it was. I had a difficult childhood. I couldn't cope with my feelings. They got too big for me. I was terrified. I didn't know what was going to
Mm,
happen to me when my parents started to divorce. And my mother there was something wrong with her. I'm not sure if she was an alcoholic, but she's certainly quite strange woman, depressed,
mm.
perhaps bipolar, I don't know. And my father left and went to live somewhere else. And it was just, I was frightened. And I started to drink, and I drank at school. I was at boarding school, and I had Ribena in my I had Dubonnet in my Ribena bottle, and I'd have a swig before bed. And so it became part of me as I was growing, as my brain was developing. Alcohol became my friend, my comforter, and it twined itself around me as actually, I feel like a serpent, actually. It squeezed so tight. I just didn't know it was there. It was just who I was. And
And when you were, so Arabella, what I think is fascinating in the book is both your mum's journey, which is, it's very hard in this to kind of apportion blame, because what you see is, I think by the end of the book, you just get this sense of a real kind of fault line of kind of damaged women kind of giving birth. You describe yourself at one point, Julia, as a child, kind of with a child yourself, a
mm,
frightened child, kind of with a child.
yeah,
And and I wanted to kind of congratulate both of you on kind of breaking that cycle and kind of, breaking the wheel. Because I think in many families there can be those kind of patterns that come down, maybe not
yeah,
alcohol, maybe something else. And it's really brave and hard to be the kind of the generation who kind of break the wheel, who call out the pattern, who kind of
Yeah.
kind of
yeah.
call
Well,
them
that's
out to
really
it.
what we aimed to do. Actually, was to because we wanted to call the book Omerta, to start with, but we got that was vetoed. But there is a kind of code of silence. Hence all the trouble in the family, actually, because
Mm,
it is in the family. It's everywhere. I mean, it's we're not the only family who have
no.
alcoholics, but it's particularly for women. I think it's very shameful, and because so much of women's drinking takes place in domestic environment, with children, and addicts, women or men, will climb over the bodies of their children to get what they need. That's just a fact. But it doesn't fit with the virgin and the keeper of the hearth, the goddess of the hearth, and all that. But that's the actual truth, and that's it's an illness, alcoholism, not a moral failing, and I didn't know that until I got sober. It was
So,
the most
Arabella,
important thing.
Mm.
what was it like? What was it like for you? Kind of growing
Uh-huh.
up with a mum who was in, who was that ill, as we would now
Yeah,
say.
so I guess, I mean, and I think I write about this in the book. I think for children who grow up with parents who are alcoholics, I think sort of most of all it's very confusing. And I what I really wanted to do was, without blame, was to try and distill this sense of confusion into, in the way that I describe what it was like. I mean, I think I, I think it's very hard to see your parents, you're not sure why you're not. So to give you an example, very often it's sort of, I think children of alcoholics think, is mummy asleep?
Mm,
Is she, is it the night, or is mummy asleep now on the sofa? That things like that,
yeah.
or the way in which, and I think that if you are an alcoholic and you're a parent, I think it's very easy to make quite excessive declarations of love, when and to be very effusive when you're drunk, and then the
Mm,
next day I think the child remembers certain promises or things like that, and then suddenly they've just evaporated, because this is the great sort of shape shifting of any alcoholic, is that you're one person, you've got many different masks. And I think growing up in that environment was very difficult. And I know that children of alcoholics are statistically more likely to become alcoholics themselves. And so I think that what is profoundly damaging is that you grow up, in a very, when you're in these very formative years, when you're a child, and you see things that are dysfunctional, but very quickly the abnormal becomes very normal. I mean, it's kind of like, we're in another pub with daddy. I mean, and why is that? And that's confusing. And or other things like, a parent can't drive, for example, so you're
mm.
you're sent home in a taxi, for these are just examples. And I think slowly, as the child of an alcoholic, I think you come to consciousness that your world is not like other people's.
And when was that for you? And did you, I mean, your mum was talking about shame. Do you think that there's also a kind of, I mean, I know from friends of mine who the children of alcoholics, that there was quite a lot of shame around
Yeah, I think I think
their parent not being kind of compos mentis or.
yeah, I think there's a huge amount of shame involved. And also I think the thing is, and this is the absolute kicker, is that you feel that you can't tell anyone, because then
Mm,
you're betraying mummy and daddy. And what child ever wants to do that? No child
yeah.
wants to do that. And so, the silence, it literally fills it's like air in a vacuum. I mean, you can't, if you say to your teacher at school, I'm worried, I think my mother or my father has a problem with drink, you're going to get in trouble at home if you say that,
Yeah, or
because
you
that's
might even get taken, you might even get
yeah,
taken away from
exactly.
them.
So that's going to cause all sorts of other, really
Issues.
quite serious problems. And so, but I think that, I think that at a certain point, I don't think that children know that they're doing it. I think that the silence becomes, sort of like mum's saying, the serpent coils itself around you, and you don't realize what's happening to you. Um, I know.
When did you realize that your mum, did have a problem, wasn't like kind of other mothers?
I guess, I suppose it's difficult for me to, because we had quite a bohemian childhood. And so I can't really say, mum, and I'm proud to say this, that mum was not, she wasn't like other mothers, but this sense of difference was sort of quite carved out. When did I know that mum had a problem with drink? I think it sort of, I think there was a lot of distress in our household. I think there
Mm.
was, and I think it's fair to say this, Mum, isn't it, that very often there was some kind of emotional crisis. I would say that the emotional temperature was incredibly high all the,
Yeah, it sounds like that in the book, that there
is
was
that
quite a
that
lot of quite a lot
yeah,
of
yeah.
drama.
But I mean,
Yeah.
in some ways, I think that this was also, I think you grow up and people are like, your mum's a writer. You know, it's sort of built into this cultural shorthand that we have about writing and, you know, these extremes of emotion and these, you know, that, you know, of course your mum is, you know, of course your mum sort of loses her temper or does this, you know, she's a writer, she's exceptional. And I think, you know, and I think somehow this narrative of sort of exceptionalism builds itself, you know, into the whole thing. And, you know, so I think for mum and I, it's been about unraveling the writing and the drinking and
Yeah.
trying.
the writing, and also maybe some of the other kind of, you know, difficult inheritances, you know, Julia, obviously from your own mother, and that kind of emotional, that kind of
Yeah.
emotional neglect, the kind of the sense of the feelings that, you know, quite, you know, normal feelings that children have, not being contained
Yeah. I
by
mean,
somebody who is kind of meeting them with love and your needs with love, and therefore that very insecure, what we now would now call a very kind of insecure attachment, which
yes.
then turns to, you know, alcohol or other addictions to manage that sense of a void.
Yes, and I had insecure attachment, and also I discovered once I got sober that my father's father had died of cirrhosis of the liver. In fact, he was an alcoholic, so it had zigzagged through the family. It not landed on me, not my father, interestingly, and not my brother, but it landed absolutely on me. And so I was, I think, genetically predisposed to turn to alcohol when the going got rough, and the going got rough when I was becoming a teenager. I remember when I was about 13, I went to Australia with my mother, and I remember I stopped eating. That was the first time I remember trying to control my feelings, and I stopped eating, and that worked for a bit. And then after that, I turned to alcohol instead. But that I only realized once I got sober that that's what I was trying to do. And I remember it vividly because it was powerful, actually. Not eating made me feel powerful. And it really annoyed my mother too. And there's nothing she could do about it, which I liked, you know, because she was so difficult to deal with. And I felt so powerless around her that this was really the first time actually that I felt I had any power over her, actually. You know, she was, I think, poor Ma, you know, I think, you know, she was that generation. I think mental health was not, they just didn't understand it. And
I remember my granny always saying to me about mental health. She used to say, "Darling, leave your mind alone."
yes, exactly the sort of thing they came out with, wasn't it? And it's also witty and so kind of funny, but and true in a way. But I mean,
Just like, leave your mind alone, don't go there.
don't
You
go
know,
there.
have another gin,
Yeah, have
you know,
another
spliff
gin.
up a lip, we'll
Yeah,
play some bridge, it'll all be
yeah,
fine in
exactly.
the
It'll all be
morning.
fine.
Bridge, yes, lots of
I
bridge.
know
Yeah.
my mother was obsessed with bridge. That's why I never learned, you know. I can't cook either. So, and that was something else, food, you know. I mean, I can cook, but I don't really. I just put things in the microwave.
Do you think that to a certain extent kind of alcohol was just used, particularly kind of, you know, after the Second World War or whatever, as a, I mean, generally, but used as a kind of panacea, as a kind of sop to all these kind of difficult emotions that people
Oh
can.
God, yeah. I think they all, you know, all the PTSD that was floating about from the
Mm,
First World War as well. I mean,
yes.
I think alcohol was fags, drink and cigarettes, you know. I mean, they were all doing it to stay awake in the Navy, to do what they did. And I think it was definitely a prize. You only have to look at English literature to see 20th century English literature to see that this was the reward. And I picked up on that. I thought this is the reward, you know,
Mm.
for being an adult. And also it's going to take me somewhere else, like a jet ski into a different place. And that's what I wanted to be somewhere else, and I didn't want to be me. And alcohol seemed to, you know, it did work for a bit, but I was so quickly addicted that once it stopped working, I couldn't stop, you know. So I was in a real bind from very, very early on with alcohol without knowing it. I didn't know I was an alcoholic. I suspected I was in my mid-20s. But by that time, my life was, you know, the highs and lows, alcoholics, drama is just your best friend. And my life was already, my life was already chaotic and unmanageable, as we say in AA. And I didn't see how I could not drink because it
Mm.
was my only friend.
And so Arabella, growing up against this backdrop, I mean, you
Mm.
might one, you know, might think as an outsider that maybe a response to that would be, I'm never going to be, I don't want, you know, I'm never going to be my mother. That's not going to be my friend. But
Yeah.
no.
Yeah. I think that it's so sort of seductive to, I think the idea that, and I think I write about this in the book actually, is to think, I'm never going to be like my parents. I'm never, I'm never going to do those things. And then, I think as a teenager, what I discovered quite quickly was that I was actually quite good at drinking. And I was, I was, and
You knew all about it.
yeah, I knew all about it, and it felt very familiar. And suddenly, this was something that I could do with my parents.
Yes.
These figures that had, that like, mum's talking about, the relationship with her mother and all of that. And I felt, I felt that I was sort of admitted into,
Yeah.
a place
A
where,
kind of club.
A
yeah,
club.
club. And
Yeah.
it was like, I think I wrote in the book, it was like the lights came on after a power cut. It was like, oh my God, you're there. There you are, and also suddenly you're an adult. And this is
Mhm.
this is this is incredibly, I mean, incredibly intoxicating as a feeling if you have, struggled to connect with your parents.
Yes.
Suddenly think, hang on a minute, here we are, we're laughing, and this is, and then you think, gosh, I understand. But what happened to me is that, it was a search for connection, I guess, with my parents. It started off in that way, but I mean, it took me, I mean, I was very quickly addicted, but I was also, I was very good at drinking. I seemed to be able to drink an awful lot,
Yeah,
and that was always,
from when you were pretty young. And that was kind of in the youth culture, that was kind of cool.
well, I guess, I grew up I guess I kind of came to my drinking years in the noughties, and it was like, ladette, drink,
Yeah.
I suppose it was the era of you can have it all, and you can drink as much as you like, and there was a certain bravado to binge drinking. I mean, not, I think the term binge drinking has evolved since then, but
Mm.
I certainly think, I thought, wow, I'm really good at, I'm just, I seem to have the ability to drink an awful lot. And it
And
was
how
very,
was it seen by how was it seen by your contemporaries? Was that quite normalized? Were there quite a lot of other people who were drinking in the same way as you?
no, I mean, I think that my contemporaries thought that I mean, I think very often my peers thought that I had gone too far. I mean, very quickly, and I realized, I only realized this when I got sober, but very quickly it became apparent to the people around me that I was drinking for entirely different reasons,
Yeah, or in a different way.
in a
Yeah.
total yeah, in a totally different way. I mean, other people, they would drink and they would get up, and they would get up the next day. I believe they went to work,
They went to lectures, or yeah.
they went to lectures, they went to work. I mean, for me, I would go out drinking, and I simply would not emerge for, days. I mean, I say days. I wouldn't emerge definitely until the next evening, and only then to buy alcohol
Wow.
to keep, but I mean, I remember lying in when I was an undergraduate, I remember lying in bed sobbing with a wine bottle and thinking, I don't know what's wrong with me. I just don't,
Mm.
I don't know what's wrong with me. And I remember that my friends were very confused, because it wasn't a party. It was never a party for me. I very quickly went to a place of darkness with it, and I think that was quite alarming for my
Yeah.
friends to
So
see.
it wasn't about having a good time or being kind of out on the lash or
Well, I think I thought it was, and then very quick, but then very quickly it just became, it became, oh my God, is Arabella okay? Because she's,
mm.
she's crying in the corner, or she's like, she's passed out, or she won't come out of her room, or Arabella's cut herself, or, it very, very quickly it escalated into something that I felt was mental illness. I didn't understand it as addiction. In
And
my
Julia, what did you think when you could see your daughter, not emerging? Because I know she lived with you for some of this time, kind of not been
Yes,
from her room for days and sitting
what
in
did I
bed
think?
drinking and feeling sad.
Yes, I just felt absolutely powerless and desperate. And I actually didn't think she was an alcoholic I thought she was depressed because her drinking pattern, the binge drinking, I called myself a daily binge drinker. I mean, but Arabella could go days between having drinks. And I in those days didn't understand that alcoholism has many, it's different for everyone. But I thought if you could go a day without a drink, you couldn't be an alcoholic, because I couldn't really go a day without a drink. So
Right.
my drinking pattern was different to hers. So I was very worried. But I was also married. I'd married again to somebody I shouldn't have married, and the marriage was going down the pan. And Arabella was living with us, and my ex-husband, I mean then husband, wasn't, he blamed me for what was going on with Arabella, and I didn't know what to do, and I just didn't know what to do in my relationship with him either.
Yeah.
So
So there were kind of, lots of things going on at the moment
I
that
was in
kind
a
of need like
terrible
that
bind.
kind of cluster
I
cluster
literally had
bundle.
my, I had my hands tied behind my back. And I tried not to respond. And of course, it was just the most terrible time of my life, actually, and terrible for Arabella too, because she was living in this house of such, it's just the end, just I'd done it again, I'd married the wrong person, and it was more, I just felt awful, awful, such shame and such.
Oh, Mum, I feel so
I
sad
know
hearing
it's
this.
awful. No, don't it's all right. It's all right now. But it must have been really tough for both of you. And I think that what's amazing about the book that you've created between you is I also think that to be able to be so honest about kind of how
Yeah,
awful it was for both of you,
Yeah.
and that must have been really hard. I mean, I think the bit where you describe you're hosting the AA meeting and Arabella is kind of sharing her story,
yeah,
kind of Oxford posse. I mean, that's really hard, isn't it? I mean, I really sympathize because I mean, I talk a little bit about my mother in my book, and
Mm,
that's been one of the most difficult things that has come out of it because she really didn't like it, and it's
yeah.
nowhere. It's nowhere near the levels that you got onto. So I really, and I also really understand what it's like when you start writing about your broader family. They really bloody hate it. I mean,
They hate it.
I
And
was a
also,
columnist for 20 years myself, so
yes,
I really understand about that.
yes, I
And
know you
so
do. And I
how
think
did
that,
you I'm really interested in the kind of process between you as you started to write this book, or what it was like to sit there listening to Arabella kind of doing that, and how you've managed that emotional journey between the two of you, because I think it's quite remarkable.
yes, I think, I mean, to start with, I was just really bloody irritated, actually. I thought, this is mine, because
This is my thing.
this is my fellowship. Like I once had a Dalmatian used to put her paws around her bowl, and I was a bit like that with AA. I thought, this is mine. Don't want you here. And then luckily, I had a sponsor who was really tough, and I told her, I grumbled. I said, Arabella said, she said, you've got to pray for her. I thought, what? Pray? I don't even know how to pray. And she really put me right. And she said, it's her life, her choice. You should be bloody grateful she's come into the rooms. And she really kicked me up the arse. And luckily, I was so desperate at that point to stay sober that I listened. I listened to what she said, and I did what I was told, and I got out of her way, and but it was difficult. And I also, because I used to joke that I would track her through the rooms of AA to hear all the bits of her life that I'd missed out on when I was drunk. But the real truth was that I was hearing things that I'd missed and that I should have been around to help her, and I wasn't, basically. And it was very painful. And I use humor as a way of diffusing that pain. But it was very painful to me to hear how lonely and how difficult her life had been, because her father has died. He's dead now of this illness as well. So, it's everywhere in Arabella's life. It's all over the shop. And so I felt it was a very difficult time, but I'm not quite sure how we did get through it. But I think AA preaches honesty and tolerance, and somehow or other both seemed to take that on board, and we quite often rowed, but it said, if you know you were wrong, and you must promptly admit it. And we used that a lot. I apologized to her, she apologized to me, and gradually we built a kind of way of being able to be honest with each other. Because with my mother, I could never discuss anything with her. I mean, our relationship was emotional pack ice. We couldn't move.
Mm.
Anything, I just couldn't talk to her. And I just sometimes thought, if only she would just say, look, I'm really sorry I fucked up, darling. Just once, that would have melted the pack ice, but it never happened. And we somehow melted our pack ice, Arabella and I, by being in the fellowship, which is actually it's a form of moral psychology. It preaches a kind of moral code. I mean, it sounds culty, but it just isn't. It's just a handbook for living in a loving and tolerant way. And there's a lot of it about in the rooms of AA, actually, a lot of love and a lot of tolerance. And we took that on board and we used it with each other. And we've built this new relationship, haven't we, Arabella?
And I think
Yeah.
what really comes across in the book, and I really like to hear Arabella's side of this, is
Mm.
the huge love actually that you have for each other. So, in the kind of chaos of, your kind of childhood, Arabella, there's obviously a lot of love and some good stuff there too, because that
Yeah.
I think really comes across in your
Mm.
in the way that you
Yeah.
talk about each other, or the way that you've been able to salvage it or get through the pack ice. Do you want to talk about it from your point of view?
Yeah. So I guess I'm glad that that comes across that that because mum and we have and I think we always have we've always had and partly this is because of the sort of likenesses that we have and the way our lives have always actually sort of zigzagged. Mum and I have an incredibly strong bond. I don't think you're my best friend, Mum, but you're
No, I'm not.
um I definitely think that mum and I have, and I think this is to do with a lot of the pain that we've had together. And some of that pain has been adjacent, but I think, I think that, we've been able to we've been able to see so much of each other and, in us, we've been able to look at each other and feel that connection. And that is so strong. I think the writing of the book, I don't think that we really sort of understood when we started out what we would take, what exactly we were taking on as
Yeah.
as an enterprise. I don't think we understood it, but it has, if possible, it has deepened our bond,
Mm.
and I think that we've always been there. There are very many sort of things that mum and I have both taken up together. Like I wrote my PhD on the First World War, and mum wrote her first novel about it. And
And
you
we've
know,
always spent a lot of time in cemeteries, haven't we? We
yeah,
like
yeah,
cemeteries.
always in graveyards. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, we like graveyards.
we like the graveyards. I think that AA gave us, I think it is
The
on a
tools.
yeah.
Yes, tools.
But also just the most extraordinary experience of being, it's not like being in family therapy because you're there as a kind of as an individual. But it has been, and I think we really wanted to write about how extraordinary that experience is to both be healing at the
Mm.
same time and to both start this journey of reinvention at such different points in our lives. And it felt so extraordinary at the time. It still does, doesn't it, Mum? We
Yeah, it feels amazing,
And,
actually.
yeah
and
we
the question that I wanted to ask you, Arabella, was, do
Mm.
you think that if your mum hadn't got sober at that point, you would have got sober so early? I mean, was
yeah
there
that
was there a sense that because she was doing it, you kind of therefore felt maybe you could
yeah I think I would have got sober, but I think it would have taken me a lot longer. And I think as I write in the book, I felt as if when mum started going to AA and I saw a lot of the literature around the house, and it really felt as if I wasn't spying on her, I was spying on me. I was
Mm.
looking for a tip off about myself. I think I write that in the book. And I
Yes.
and I was looking, I was trying to understand what was wrong with me. But there was a lot of skepticism. On my part.
Mm.
I do think I think that I would have got sober, but I think I would have had another decade, I think. And I think because I really, really identified as someone who was depressed. I
Yeah.
really, I really didn't see myself as an alcoholic. I really courted depression as a sort of as an illness because I felt that it was more feminine somehow.
Yeah.
Mm.
I
Or
felt
more, or kind of more acceptable.
more
Yes, I think so.
acceptable, and I felt that the sting of blame and shame had been, taken out of that one slightly. And I read a lot of Sylvia Plath, and I sort of I kind of felt that that was a far more interesting thing to be than an alcoholic. And mum gave me permission, I guess, at such a young age to be able to face up to what happened to me.
And in fact, it was, as it turned out, the greatest gift I could have given her. But I think you see a lot of young women in their 20s and 30s in AA. And, if you lose that, if you lose those years, you're in so much trouble as a woman because you've got so much catching up to do. If you can get sober in time, I've seen a lot of, it's a terrible thing, alcoholism, actually, for women in particular, I think, because of the shame of it, and because our reproductive window is, of a certain length. And I've seen lives just decimated, not that's the wrong word, but, absolutely overwhelmed by alcohol and drugs. It's just, but I think alcoholism is our sort of speciality subject, really. And, we're so lucky to be sober. Anyway, I could waffle on. I'm sorry, I'm waffling.
No, I'm just interested in some of the comments that are in the chat. So
Yes.
there's something saying, Caroline saying, I was oblivious to how upset my family and worried them and was inconsistent with my children. In turn, I was terrified as a child when my family drank and their behavior changed, their personalities, and was ignored. I had to put myself to bed, thought this was normal, learnt to be super independent and emotionally shut off.
Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think so also people talking about how Lucy was saying that in her very kind of military family, you were seen as
Yes.
jolly dull if you didn't drink.
Yes.
And I get a bit of that because I don't really drink. And so and people do kind of think you're a bit boring, or the kind of letting the side down if everybody else is doing it. Do you think that kept you going for a while, Julia?
Yeah, I think it did. And I think also I remember saying to someone at a drinks party in London, saying, I'm worried I'm drinking too much. And he said to me, well, just cut down. You can't cut down if you're an alcoholic. There's the one thing you can't do. You just can't. But I was ashamed, so I didn't say anything. I thought there's something wrong with me, I can't stop. But I didn't want to seek help because I was frightened of, I was just scared. And I just, that's what kept me stuck actually as an alcoholic until my early 50s. In the end, I had to seek help. I was in that, they call it in AA, the gift of desperation. And I had that, and I was very lucky, and I acted on it. And I got so much, it was just, as soon as I went to, you see, I was a world expert on boozing, but I knew nothing at all about alcoholism. And that's what I learned in AA. They teach you about the illness. There's something called the Big Book, which is the handbook, and there's lots of literature about it. But I knew I was an alcoholic, but I didn't understand what that meant. And I didn't understand how to stop. So
And
AA, so
I
that's,
I thought what was really interesting in the book also was you talking about the kind of the triggers and how you began to notice, and I've actually began to notice, having read your book, the pervasion of kind of glasses of cold beer with kind of condensation,
yeah.
or people drinking kind of rosé in the sun, or this kind of amazing kind of romantic.
It's the great romance of alcohol. And I think, a lot of that, some of that at any rate, came out of Prohibition, because, I mean, AA was founded just at the end of Prohibition, which is very interesting timing, and then you have all these writers, Hemingway and Scott Fitzgerald, and all these people,
Dylan Thomas. I mean,
Dylan Thomas, O'Neill, they're all alcoholics, and yet this is seen as, as a badge of honor, really. And I mean,
Dorothy
Dorothy
Parker,
Parker,
yeah.
she was an alcoholic,
Yeah, I was going to say I was just in a this weekend I was at a literary festival talking about my book in Ireland,
Oh,
home,
wow.
home of the great drinkers.
Yes, absolutely.
And I was there with a poet called Paul Muldoon, who's one of the great Irish poets, and it was the thing about him. And I was talking to him, and he doesn't drink, and he said, Eleanor, you kind of get to a point as an Irish poet where you think, either you're going to die of the booze, or
Yeah.
you stop drinking. You know, he's
Yeah.
74, and he's so, and I think it's so interesting in that culture, the whole culture of the kind of the crack and the Guinness.
Yes.
First thing you see when you go into Dublin Airport is
Yeah.
two towers that they've constructed to look like a pint of Guinness.
Yeah.
That's the first kind of image that you get when you kind of walk into Dublin. So I think you're right that the kind of this like ridiculous romanticization of booze is saturated in our
Well,
culture.
the advertising industry knows exactly what it's doing, and booze and all these, set Greek islands and all,
Mm,
yeah, I mean, they know that the romance, the beautiful backdrops will sell drinks, and it works. I mean, it
Yeah.
works brilliantly. Um,
and it's part of what you want to do now to kind of try and kind of kind of deprogram people from that. I mean, I certainly feel with what I was trying to do with my book was to make people see the way that the kind of media and the culture kind of enforces ageism, and the way
yes,
that there's only a particular narrative, or you're only allowed to see older women who don't actually look old on screen, or
yes, yes.
that there are so many ways in which there are similar kind of tropes. So is that something you're both quite interested in trying to highlight now?
I think that it's so mired in shame, and I think we need to bring it out of the shadows and stop it being seen as as a moral failing. It's an illness, a
Yeah, but I
mental
also, I
illness.
also, I also think, Mum, and I think what we, in answer to your question, Eleanor, I think what we would like to achieve with the book is to challenge assumptions about
Mm,
what an alcoholic looks like, and and that's about unpacking. It's not the man on the park bench. It could
Yeah,
be,
it's
it
us,
could be, and it
me.
absolutely, and I think we felt very strongly about, about how the female alcoholism does lie. It's in the shadows. It's a
yeah.
glass. It's the glass of wine with the shaky hand when you've put the children to bed. It's the swig of gin after the school run. It's the, I don't know, it's the bottle by the washing machine. It's all of this. It's absolutely just, it's there in that domestic life. And I don't think, and I had never read a memoir that spoke frank is, that I wanted I guess the book is what we were always wanting to read about,
Yeah.
about being a female alcoholic. And you have people like Caroline Knapp, who wrote so brilliantly Drinking a Love Story, over 20 years now, over 20 years
Mm,
ago now, but she didn't have children. And I think what we wanted, we wanted to talk about, well, mothers, daughters, and addiction, but particularly what the experience of motherhood,
yeah. No, I think that that's so true, and that's such a. I mean, I really admire and respect both of you for doing this book, because I think it's a really brave book about
Thank you.
the puncturing those taboos and the shame around it.
Yeah.
And I know that that's really hard, and I think that you've both really gone there in what you share in the book. And I really hope that also it allows maybe other women who read it to see that that they do have a problem, that it's not
Mm.
that it's and it's not just like, oh, I like a drink, that it becomes a problem. There's an interesting question, I think, from Jenny Calcone, who's saying who's in Santa Barbara. Hello,
Oh,
Jenny.
hi,
Oh, hello,
Jenny.
Jenny.
She says, I don't have alcoholism in my family, but there is other mental illness, and parts of your journeys are so very familiar. Thank you for so bravely sharing on this call and in the book. I know it will help other women. And I think that
Thank
that's
you.
really true, that when we're honest about the things in our lives which are shameful and difficult, and I had it to a very much a smaller extent, but I wrote about being made redundant, which again is another
Another,
taboo.
yeah,
I was having,
absolutely.
yeah, I was having lunch today with a very powerful businesswoman, and she was saying she knows so many women who've been made redundant who never talk about it. It's like kind of
Yeah.
one of those great shames. And actually, one
Yes.
of the things that was the spur to setting up Noon was I wrote this piece about being made redundant in the Telegraph, and I just had thousands of people getting in
And did
touch.
that take off
Oh
really as
yeah,
a,
massively.
yeah?
I mean, that was the kind of embryo of
I
what we
must
do
read it. I
now.
Interesting.
must read it.
Yes,
Yeah, I really
yes,
want to read that.
yes, yes.
It was called. It had a hideous, because also you must have had this, because the hideousness of the headlines that are put
Oh
on.
my
So I was 49 and fired. Was I on the scrap heap? That's that
Yes.
kind of thing. I mean, and you kind of get, and I've done so many radio shows where it's like, oh, and here's Eleanor Mills, who was fired from the Sunday Times. It's like, I wasn't fired, I was made redundant, my bit was always really successful, etc., etc. But you just have to get used to that. So you're the kind of mum and daughter alcoholic.
Yes, yes, we
Oh my
are.
God. I mean,
Yes.
I think we found with the publicity of the book that it hasn't been, it hasn't been the
Hideous.
reviews themselves. It's been the
Yeah.
headlining
Oh,
has been
I
so,
drank with my mum,
yeah.
and
oh, it's been so inflammatory, and it's such a
Mm.
shame because this is, the book, because the book is about, anyway, but
Well, the book is really measured. I'm just saying that I really feel your pain, and I think it's something that's done, over and over and over again, particularly to women.
no,
One of the
totally.
ones on mine was I was 8 when I realised my parents thought I was too fat or something.
Oh God.
Like half a sentence in one of the chapters, and that was the banner headline on the front of the Daily Mail.
yes, they love a good
I mean,
headline.
I'm glad to say my book did become a bestseller,
Oh,
so
well
maybe it
done.
was worth it. But
It was worth
oh,
it.
the agony, all the publicity director at HQ and everything, they were all like, "Oh, it's brilliant! You've done so much publicity." I was going, "This is actually probably the most hideous." I've been a journalist for 30 years, right?
Yes.
This is probably the kind of worst
Oh,
rubbing
glad you said that.
I've ever had. So I really feel your pain on that.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I feel as a journalist that I've been quite, I thought that I was quite prepared,
Yeah,
but
me too.
oh my gosh, yeah,
Yeah.
But
it's
I think the thing is, the Noon, it seems to be about, the hidden parts of women's lives a lot,
Yeah.
and actually this subject is one of those hidden. It's not discussed because it's unpretty, it's
Mm.
hateful, and and I think it's an aspect of women's lives that just isn't discussed. And sometimes at parties, people have said to me, "Oh, what's your new book about?" And quite often I'd would think twice about my answer actually, but if I told them, sometimes they sort of recoiled slightly, because it's not socially acceptable to discuss it really.
Well,
And
also particularly if you're at a kind of cocktail party where
yeah, well,
everyone's
quite,
getting hammered,
yeah,
they don't really want to
no,
kind of own up to maybe that they've got a problem. I mean,
yeah,
journalism was absolutely rife with
mm,
alcoholics, and the kind of liquid lunch was a
oh my
real,
God, yeah,
was a real kind of badge of honor. I mean, I was always hopeless on that front because I could just never do it. But it
oh
was quite
well,
normal to
yeah,
kind of be taken out for lunch and for people to have like one or two bottles, like 2 bottles of wine each. It was
yes,
unbelievable. The
yes,
consumption and then they'd go back to their desks and think that they were writing great copy. I mean, I could never understand that either back in the early 90s. It was just like it must have been complete gobbledygook. But the whole newsroom was like half cut most of the time. I mean, it was
yeah,
extraordinary.
I know.
mm.
But I do think the female angle on it is really important. Is anyone would anyone there like to ask a question directly to Arabella and Julia? We've got a kind of a few minutes left. Does anyone want to? Caroline, is there something you'd like to ask? You've been very so kind of honest and open on the chat. Or any comment? It looks like we've got
No,
Caroline.
just congratulations. I know them both very, very, very well. So
Ah, okay.
Yes,
not,
hi Caroline.
not, but I'm very supportive and very proud of both of you. And I
Thank you.
remember when you first started talking about it. So brilliant. Well done. Both.
Thank you, Caroline, darling, lovely, thank you.
And have you had, what's the reaction been? I mean, I know you've been doing like endless press. Have you been getting lots of emails and things from people and people been buying the book?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of friends have said to me, I didn't realize it was so bad. And that's an interesting response because, I was obviously, well, I thought I was quite good at hiding, but,
You obviously were.
I obviously was in a way, but and yeah, so that my friends have been incredibly supportive actually, but my family rather different, not pleased at all, and I mean I understand that because also I think we've taken charge of the narrative, and a lot of people people don't like that in families, especially men, because we're women, and again it's a women thing. They don't like us being in charge of the family story as they see it.
Yeah, but I think the
And
response to the book, I think I think I've had so many messages from people I don't know about, just about the experience of growing up as a child with
Yeah.
alcoholic
yeah,
parents, and that this is one of the huge drivers for me to write this book was to be able, because there is was to be able to put that into words in some way, however
Yeah.
imperfect. So yeah.
And how much, when you sit at AA, how often do you hear that the people who are there have had parents who've also had problems? I mean, is it quite established that this is something that goes through families?
I think
Yes,
you often hear people
you often
say,
hear it.
you know, my grandfather was an alcoholic, my father was an alcoholic. What is rare is to see a father and a son in AA, a
Yeah,
mother and a
together.
daughter. You know, so you often hear people, you know, casting back, trying to look, you know, trying to sort of do the forensic work of looking through their families and saying, you know, what happened. But as I think, you know, Mum and I have often said, the trail goes cold. You know, if you
Very fast. With your
very
grandparents,
fast.
you don't know who they were really.
But also, people do not want to talk about it. So if you say to someone, you know, if you say, you know, a relation was so and so an alcoholic, they invariably will tell you to stop asking those kind of questions. And
Yeah.
so, you know, so the book has been about asking those questions and about you know, about going back. But, you know, inevitably, it hasn't pleased.
Can I just say something? I see on one of the questions said, what is the definition of an alcoholic? And for me, the definition of an alcoholic is somebody who has no off switch. As soon as I have the first drink, I don't know where I'll end up because I can't stop. And so I can't have, they say in AA, don't take the first drink. And to start with, I thought, no, they say it's the first drink that does the damage. I thought, no, it's not. It's the 7th or the 8th. And eventually I realized, yes, it is the first drink because it opens the door in your head and you're off like a greyhound after a rabbit.
Yeah. So there's a kind of lack of any kind of stop, there's no stop valve.
That's why it's total abstinence, because some therapies say cut back, but no real alcoholic. I couldn't do that. And from all the evidence I've heard, no real alcoholic can cut back because the door's still open in your head. You have to shut that door.
And what do you think? I mean, you write in the book about how you replaced kind of, you know, if you're an addictive personality, you can stop the alcohol, but often some other kind of addictive habit comes in its place. I mean, I knew A.A. Gill very well, who
Oh,
had
did you?
a
Gosh.
massive alcoholic. Yeah, I was his editor for years.
Oh, were you?
And when
Yes.
you had lunch with Adrian, which I used to do quite a lot, he would smoke. Oh, well, when he was a smoker, he would smoke fags like 40 fags in 20 minutes. So like, you spend most of the time when you were reviewing the restaurant outside on the step as he smoked fags. And then when he gave up fags, it was coffee. And he would literally have like 10 espressos during kind of, you know, an hour. So whatever it was, he had to do in a kind of very kind of addictive way. I think
it's like a fist under a blanket addiction. It moves around, it pops up in different shapes. I mean, I'm definitely addicted to shopping and eating the whole packet of biscuits, but you know, I can still drive safely when I've had a packet of custard creams, and so I try not to beat myself up about that now because, you know,
Bella's really laughing. What's your take on that?
Well, no, I mean, I just totally, I can just picture Mum eating a whole packet of custard creams, but
do it standing on my head.
I do think
Let's see that.
Yes, exactly. I think addiction migrates. I think, you know, and we wanted to talk about that in the book, about how, you know, you might be sober in AA, but you still might be absolutely nuts, you know.
Yeah, like me.
Doing things that you just never, you know, and I think in sobriety I have had moments where I've thought, oh my God, I feel drunk on this, you know, and certainly for me, journalism kind of had all the highs. Oh, you know, it was very intoxicating, addicting thing to be doing.
Well, it's up, down, it's high, low.
But you know, an editor emails you back, it's absolutely thrilling. It's the high, it's the adrenaline, it's the
hit.
time,
That's what it is.
you know, it's a hit. It's the hit. So yeah, it absolutely migrates and into like love and sex and love addiction, cigarettes.
We haven't got time
we
to
haven't
talk
really
about
gone
that.
there on that. I know that's
I don't think we've got time for that.
No, I think that's like a whole other book.
Another 100 hours on that.
In there. But yeah, exactly. I wanted to thank you both so much. You can see my note, but I was reading it like Ireland, and I kept there's so many things that I kind of pulled out that I wanted.
Thank you for having us. It's been an amazing hour. Yeah, thank you so much, you lot.
Well, we'd love to do more with y'all on Noon. I think that,
Well,
This
I
is
would love that. I'm signing up. I'm a bit too old for podcasts, I thought, but I was so riveted by amazing. I'm on.
yeah. Well, I think what this has shown, the number of people that signed up for this, we had a very good group here today. We had, you know, basically 4 times the amount sign up for this event, and I think it really speaks to people who are experiencing drinking maybe as problematic in their own lives or in a family member's life or in a parent's life and whatnot. And so it'd be great to have y'all back. And
Thanks, Jennifer. We'd love to come
Yeah, no,
back.
I
Thank you,
think
Eleanor. So interesting.
Yes,
So
we
interesting.
can
Thank
all
you.
we can all be in
Riveting.
touch. Yeah, it was
no, it was really, really lovely to meet you both. I really loved the book. I thought it was beautifully written and so brave to
Thank
show
you.
both of your points of view. And I know how hard that can be. And so I just wanted to congratulate you both and
Thank you.
say that I think you've done something really important.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm wagging, you can't see it, but I'm wagging my tail so hard.
No, and I think that everyone's really loved the interview online, and we've recorded it as well, so it'll get a
Okay.
lot more
yeah, so
traction on the Noon website.
okay.
All right. Thank you so much. Lovely ladies. Thank you. Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks a
Thank you
lot.
for
Bye-bye.
joining us. And just for all of you on there, the next book is called Beautiful Game by Amanda Jennings. And those of you who are coming to our Noon Christmas party, in fact, Julia and Arabella, if you'd like to come, you'd be
Yes,
so
please.
welcome. 3rd of December at
yeah.
the Albright Club.
Oh, great. Yeah, I'll
Put
be
you on the
there.
guest list if you'd like to come
Yes,
in.
please. Lovely.
And
What was the
lovely
next
ladies
novel?
on it looks right.
Okay.
It looks quite good
I'll
fun.
get
It's
that.
kind of Brideshead Revisited-ish esque, I think.
Oh, lovely. Okay, great.
And we'll have, if you're somebody who usually who's a paid member who gets a book, we're going to be handing them out at the party for people who come to the party, and then we'll send them to. And we've got a new system whereby if you want the book, you need to fill in your address on the Google form, because we've had some people who got books who didn't want them. So we've got a new system. So just to say that, you're going to be getting an email from us. And if you want the book, you need to sign up to it. And if you come to the party, you will get a copy, which will be good.
Lovely.
And thank you so much, all of you, for joining us today. And we've also got noon walks in Brighton, Cornwall and Cardiff, if anyone fancies those, and new circles starting all over the place, including in Santa Barbara next week, which we're really excited
Hey.
about. So thank you so much for
here
joining.
today.
Sorry?
Lovely to meet you all.
Lovely. Thanks, everyone.
Wow.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Take care. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, so shall I hit stop recording, Jen?